Have you found yourself navigating a dark night of the soul? Are you craving a deeper connection with the divine feminine? Are you ready to integrate the balanced union of the masculine and feminine within? Then let's get started on the journey towards wholeness to reclaim your sovereign soul. My name is Cynthia Clark. Over the past several decades, I have undergone many dark nights of the soul. My healing journey has been a reclamation of my sovereign divinity. Whether you're just starting out on your self-healing journey or have been exploring techniques for many years, Discover Divinity offers an opportunity to uncover the new possibilities for discovering and reclaiming the innate wisdom within. It is time to discover the new possibilities. It is time to discover you. Have you ever felt lost, as if the world you once knew is slipping away? Or perhaps you're facing a deep inner turmoil, unsure of where to turn? You're not alone. Join us in this latest episode of The Dark Night of the Soul, Navigating the Sacred Path to Awakening, where we explore this powerful transformative journey. In today's episode, we'll uncover the roots of this profound experience from its origins with the mystic Saint John of the Cross and how spiritual teachers like Eckhart Tolle interpret it. Learn about the stages of spiritual awakening and why the darkness you're facing might just be the key to your greatest breakthrough. We'll also guide you through a practical step-by-step approach to navigate this challenging phase, offering comfort and clarity to those walking through the darkness. Whether you're in the midst of this experience or simply curious, this episode will help you understand the importance of the dark night of the soul. Tune in now to discover how this moment of crisis can lead to a deeper connection with your true self. Welcome to the Discover Divinity Podcast, Reclaim Your Sovereign Soul. My name is Cynthia Clark, the founder of Discover Divinity and discoveringdivinity.com. In today's episode, we are diving into one of the most profound and transformative experiences on the spiritual awakening journey, the dark night of the soul. This powerful yet often misunderstood phase is characterized by deep inner turmoil, emotional upheaval, and spiritual crisis, ultimately leading to profound growth, awakening, and a deeper connection with your true self. In this episode, we're delving into its origins and definition, but also tracing its roots back into the 16th century, as well as exploring modern day interpretations. I will be guiding you through the stages of a spiritual awakening and offering clear understanding of how the dark night plays a pivotal role in this process of self-realization and growth. You can expect to learn about the role of the dark night of the soul in spiritual development and common symptoms you might experience during this phase, as well as a 5-step guide to help you navigate through it. So whether you are navigating the darkness yourself or simply seeking clarity, this podcast provides valuable insights and practical steps for healing and transformation. You will feel equipped with mindfulness techniques, self-compassion practices, and tools that you may need to walk through this challenging phase with patience, trust, and hope. Before we dive in, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on your own journey. As we explore the dark night of the soul, ask yourself, have you experienced this phase of deep inner turmoil, or perhaps you're currently in the midst of it? What emotions or challenges are you facing on your path to spiritual awakening? These questions will help you connect more deeply with today's topic and may provide valuable insights as we move forward. So let's get started in the first part of today's episode with its origins and definitions. The dark night of the soul is a concept that actually originated in the 16th century, coined by the Spanish mystic Saint John of the Cross. His work, especially in his famous poem, The Dark Night of the Soul, delves into the notion of spiritual desolation and the soul's journey through an intense period of separation from the divine. In his writing, St. John describes this as a time when the soul feels abandoned, lost, or overwhelmed. Yet, paradoxically, it's also a time of deep spiritual purification. Originally, St. John's description was rooted in Christian mysticism, representing the soul's intense struggle with God's perceived absence. However, in today's world, the dark night of the soul has taken on a more universal meaning. Many more spiritual seekers, including Eckhart Tolle, one of my favorite authors, has identified this experience as a vital part of spiritual growth, not just within Christianity, but across many belief systems. In Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, he actually touches on a similar experience and describes the process as a dissolution of the ego. It's that false self that defines us through our thoughts, attachments, and fears. This experience can be both painful and enlightening, and it is the dark night that's often the process through which one sheds this ego, forcing us to face the rawness or these parts of our true self or those aspects of the shadow. You may have heard the term shadow work, and it's quite a buzzword in the healing world, but many times part of that shadow work causes us to come into the space of examining the ego. So this moment of ego dissolution, however, often feels like a dark night because we lose the familiar sense of identity and meaning that the ego once provided. It's a time of spiritual crisis, but also a time of incredible transformation. And so if you think about a caterpillar that goes through its stages of metamorphosis, first goes through this process of finding leaves, getting its nourishment, coming through a phase where it's building. And like it knows it's got a further mission. And so innately, the caterpillar searches and goes into a different process of growth and awareness. And so it gets as much as it can until it moves into that next stage of building its cocoon. And once it goes into that cocoon, there's almost an ooh or a goo of a process. There's probably something scientific that explains this, but there is kind of like this breaking down part of that cocoon where the caterpillar actually transforms and it starts to create a new part of its essence, and it's building these wings, but it has to go through that dark ooh and goo part of the transition in order to then finally make its way out, bite its way out of that little cocoon, and eventually spread its wings and fly. So that brings us into the next section of our episode today, and that is the spiritual awakening in its stages. So because we understand the origin, the definition of the dark night of the soul, I wanted to give you a little bit more of that context of a spiritual awakening. I've given you the description of this caterpillar that goes through that transformation process and eventually gets into the butterfly stage. But a spiritual awakening, just like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, is not a one-time event. It's typically a gradual process. And like any journey, it involves a series of stages. And many people will experience several stages of this awakening before, during, and after their encounter with the dark night. So I'm briefly going to go into this. I actually have a course that I will reference in the description below that can bring you into a course that I taught that expands these sacred awakening stages and the dissolution of ego and bridging into that space of your sovereign soul, your divine essence. But I wanted to briefly cover that today. So I will make sure that I post that below. But let's break down some of the key stages of the spiritual awakening and see where the dark night fits into the process. So let's start with the first part. This is called maybe the initial awakening, that aha. And in these early stages of the spiritual awakening, a person might experience what we call the aha moment, right? This is the breakthrough. They might be seeing beyond the surface of light. They might have a glimpse, kind of a little opening into light where they've had a moment of recognition of deeper truth. And sometimes this can be a little euphoric, but it's a realization that there is more to reality than meets the eye. And next, we get into more of like this honeymoon phase. So these are the fun parts of an awakening. It's kind of like the rainbows and roses stage of awakening that most people seem to love. It's kind of those highs of spirituality. It's an uplifting feeling. It's where you feel connected and at peace with the universe. And this phase is often full of light and joy, and everything seems to make sense. And it can feel like living in a heightened state of consciousness. However, many times this high is often followed by an inevitable descent into the next phase, which is that dark night. So the third part of that, right, when I gave you that little description of the caterpillar that is starting to go through this metamorphosis and this excitement, right? He's traveling on his leaves. He finds the biggest leaf possible. Wow, this is exciting. Taking in all those nutrients and nourishment. And then we start to get into this new expression of movement of the metamorphosis that's starting to come into that cocoon, and then the breakdown. And so this part of the dark night of the soul, this is when the ego is starting to come into that dissolution phase that I was talking before, where we reference Eckhart Tolle. The ego is crumbling. And as we transition into these deeper stages of awakening, we begin to face our shadows, our fears, our attachments, maybe some unresolved pain. And this phase is called the dark night of the soul because the ego that once defined us begins to break down, and we're confronted with feelings of isolation, confusion, despair. And at this stage, it may seem as if the spiritual peace that we once felt has disappeared. But in reality, the darkness is a crucial part of the awakening process because it allows us to go through that metamorphosis for ourselves to begin to release any attachments to the ego and step into a more authentic self. After that, we come into more of that integration, right? We've got these wings that are starting to form, coming into this new stage of starting to maybe see some peepholes of light that are coming through the cocoon. And this is when, through that integration process, that we begin to embrace the true self. It might feel a little foreign at first because life before that was being a caterpillar. And now with wings, there are new stages to walk through and learn and understand of being a winged creature. And so coming into this space of the true self, living from a place of inner peace and clarity, sometimes is a work in process. This phase isn't always euphoric, right, as the other stage that I mentioned, but it's more grounded, it's more authentic, and we no longer have to stay attached to false identities. And then we can operate from a place of awareness and presence. And then the final stage is that enlightenment or the self-realization. And it's really that part of the flight, right? Part of that butterfly stage where the wings are out and there's a deep self-realization or enlightenment. And this is where an individual can transcend that part of the ego and experience a profound connection with the universe or the divine or God. Use whatever language works for you. But at this point, an individual is understanding that they are not separate from the world around them, and they live in this constant space of peace and oneness. Now, knowing and understanding too that this process of awakening is ever evolving. There's many times that we go through this more than once, and so different stages of our life can be in stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5. So just knowing that we can be in any of those stages many times in our life is helpful, to know that when we do hit that, we can be more prepared when that dark night of the soul is present, because it is the most challenging, it is the most painful stage of the process. But it's like we're peeling back layers when we go through these evolving stages, and being able to know and understand the role that this dark night is actually playing for us in our spiritual growth helps that process not be as dark and isolating as it can be. So at this point, you may be wondering, okay, why do I have to go through such a painful process to experience growth? And asking questions like that, sometimes we don't always get an exact answer, but being able to understand the nature of the ego is where we can come to our greatest conclusion, is these processes of the ego that we have to go through and peel back, just like I was saying. So the ego that represents a false sense of self is rooted in the attachment of fear and the desire for control. And it defines our identity through external factors like achievements, relationships, and possessions. And the dark night of the soul actually acts as a spiritual purifier. So when we go through this experience, we are forced to let go of everything we once identified with, our beliefs, our attachments, and sometimes even relationships might start to fall away. And then we're left with a sense of emptiness. This time of spiritual crisis can also be a time of profound liberation. And Eckhart Tolle, in his book, The Power of Now, said, "The greater resistance of what is happening, the greater the pain." So this is something to remember when we resist the process of spiritual awakening or the ego death. That occurs during the dark night. And we can prolong that by resisting. If you've ever heard what we resist persists, sometimes it comes in that act, right? The act of surrendering to that process is where we finally are ultimately free from the limitations of the ego. So you may be identifying or maybe feeling like, wow, this is something I have experienced, or it could be something that you're experiencing now. So I wanted to go through a few of the common symptoms that you can experience. And as you can imagine, the dark night of the soul is a deeply personal and unique experience for every individual. So it's not going to be exactly the same for every single person, but I'll go ahead. I will give you a few symptoms that you can start to identify, but there are so many more. So something that is common is emotional exhaustion. One of the most common signs is this overwhelming sense of emotional exhaustion. So you may feel as if you're drained all of the time. When you're around other people, you feel drained, and no amount of rest seems to replenish you. And this is an emotional fatigue that's due to this intense process of when you are releasing old patterns and old emotions. The next symptom is a spiritual crisis, or maybe doubt that arises. So many individuals can feel disconnected from their previous sense of identity. So especially if you've had a deep spiritual connection to a specific belief system, you might begin to doubt everything, including your beliefs and your practices. And this crisis of faith is common during the dark night as your old spiritual frameworks crumble. It can be very common, especially in systems where individuals have come up in their belief systems with things that don't necessarily settle any longer. And so know that those are very, very common parts of this experience. Another symptom can also be isolation or loneliness. Because when you go through even like something like a crisis of faith, there may be individuals around you that don't understand, or maybe they haven't gone through that. And so when you are going through something so difficult that other people don't understand, it can feel incredibly lonely, and that no one understands your experience. And so it is important to remember that even though there are going to be those who do not understand your path, know that there are others that have walked this path before you, and especially placing that intention that you will find those who have walked this path so that they can provide an extent of support, especially in this phase. Because during this phase of isolation and loneliness, it can be a very common pattern to almost self-isolate even more, because when you're that lonely and you're that isolated, you may feel like it's difficult to even reach out for help. But this is one of the stages of the dark night of the soul that I'm encouraging and I'm inviting you to find a trusted source to reach out. Another symptom may be loss of purpose. You may feel like your purpose in life is unclear, or you feel completely lost. The things that once brought you joy or meaning may seem insignificant. You may have lost your direction as a result of this ego's dissolution, and a sign that you're being called to find a deeper, more authentic sense of purpose. One other symptom to be very aware of, especially for you empaths out there, is heightened sensitivity. Some people become so much more sensitive to their surroundings, feeling overwhelmed by noise, emotions, or situations that they used to tolerate. And this heightened sensitivity is a sign that your awareness is expanding and your perception of reality is shifting. And then the last symptom I wanted to cover, like I said, these aren't all the symptoms, but these are a handful to really watch out for and are very common, is the shift of perspective on life. And as your ego starts to fall away, you may begin to see life in an entirely new way. It's a radical shift in perspective that can sometimes feel super disorienting or unsettling. And just know that even though this is happening, it is a completely natural part of spiritual growth as you start to transcend these dualities and see life as interconnected. So the next part of today's episode is some tools. I wanted to share with you a step-by-step guide for navigating the dark night of the soul. And so if you are currently going through the dark night of the soul, know that you are not alone. This phase, how difficult it is a passage toward greater peace and realization. And so my hope is that some of these practical steps will help you navigate this transformative process. So step number 1 is acceptance. The first and most important step is to accept you are in the dark night of the soul. This isn't a problem to fix, but a process to allow. And being able to resist the urge to rush through it or avoid it is not going to make the process any faster. Remember the butterfly. Every stage of going through the ooh and the goo and that new process of creating wings is necessary. And being able to surrender into that process and trust it, although it's painful, is a necessary part of your growth. The next step is number 2 is mindfulness and meditation. And if some of you out there are going, oh, well, I can't meditate. Oh, mindfulness, my brain, it's constantly going this way, that way, like it's the monkey mind. I just want to remind you it's okay. That monkey mind, the busy mind, is a natural part of the process. So let go of your expectations that the mind is going to quiet. What happens during mindfulness and meditation is we just get to allow that monkey mind or the chatter to just be there. It's something that once you accept that, it typically will quiet down, and it's something to honor. And so it's okay when you have your to-do lists or you have different processes coming through, just embrace that part. And then as you embrace that, you can step into a little deeper process to begin to face that inner chaos. And so when we focus on the breath, as well as our body's sensations, we can actually detach from that monkey mind, or maybe overwhelming emotions that are happening at this time. And so the breath is super powerful, and being able to just be present with what you're feeling in the body. And so with the Discover Divinity platform and the work that I do, I provide many meditations to my community to begin to be quick and effective ways to be able to help you calm that monkey mind, as well as soothe the nervous system and bring you into a space of letting go of some of those false identities, those false illusions, and being able to invite in that new essence that is in alignment with you. And as you are going through that metamorphosis, you are going through that stage of the cocoon, many of these meditations can help your body come into that space of peace and calm. Step 3 is self-compassion. This is so important. And even though it's number 3, in the way that I'm presenting this does not mean it's the third most important thing to do. Having self-compassion and self-love is so incredibly important in being kind to yourself. The dark night can make you feel like you're a failure. It can bring up all kinds of dimensions and layers of self-hatred. But it is so essential that you show yourself some compassion, as if you are the friend that you have needed. Being able to practice that listening ear, that self-love, the patience, the gentleness, and to always keep reminding yourself that you're not broken, you're transforming. Number 4 is journaling. Journaling can be so incredibly powerful. So writing about your feelings can be an excellent way to process your emotions. And by journaling, you find patterns. You're able to identify pieces of confusion or chaos that may be in your thoughts, and it can bring you a greater sense of self-awareness. So being able to just write freely without judgment and just letting your thoughts flow is so powerful. And then step 5 is seek support. Do not hesitate to reach out for support. Like I said, the dark night of the soul, sometimes that isolation and that loneliness can push you into an even deeper, darker hole of where you do not want to reach out. You don't want to risk embarrassment or other people seeing you as weak. But this is one of the most critical times, is to begin to reach out to those you trust, or find spiritual mentors or a therapist or someone who is trained in this field to be able to help you navigate this process. And it can be incredibly helpful, and you do not have to go through this alone. And as always, I am here to support you with the sessions that I offer, especially helping you through the dark night of the soul, helping you navigate those shadow aspects of healing, and being able to go in, like I said, coming through that process of identifying and working through the dissolution of the ego, but then bridging into this space of allowing that ego to become your friend, almost as if your teacher, to begin to help you come into this new space of transformation, this new space of metamorphosis. And it really can bridge you into this deeper innate wisdom and connect you into the soul, the inner knowing, this divine sovereign soul. So thank you for joining me in this deep dive into the dark night of the soul. And remember, if you are experiencing this phase right now, it's important to know that it's not permanent. It's a necessary part of the spiritual journey. And with time, with practice, you will emerge just like that beautiful butterfly, stronger and more aligned with your true self. Like I said before, I'll go ahead and post the course that I taught that brings you so much deeper into bridging that gap between the ego and your sovereign soul and coming into that sacred awakening. So I will post that in the comments below. But in the meantime, stay patient, trust the process, and know that you're not alone. Your breakthrough is waiting on the other side of the darkness. And until next time, may you continue to walk your path with peace, love, and the courage to face whatever comes your way. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to the Discover Divinity Podcast. If this podcast resonates with you, I invite you to check out discoveringdivinity.com. You will find resources to reclaim your sacred, sovereign spirituality. Here, you can join the Discover Divinity community, where we have free online community classes, as well as done-for-you courses and programs. Navigating the unique personal path to wholeness can feel overwhelming at times. If you would like further support or are ready to take your healing empowerment to the next level, I offer one-on-one intuitive sessions in a variety of different packages where we will discover, release, create, reclaim. Discover your innate wisdom that lies within. Release the imbalances that prevent you from living your truth. Create harmony in body, heart, mind, spirit, energy, and relationships. Reclaim your sovereign soul. It is time to discover new possibilities. It is time to discover you.